All right, friends, can you hear me okay? Yep. All right, who feels like a sardine? Patrick is definitely the most popular event that we've ever had. So thank you all for being here. Here's to Patrick. So I just wanted to get so thank you all so much for being here. I just realized our jazz music is still going, so I can tell you. So fun, right? You know, gotta start out with something classy. Just okay. Murders are very quick. All right. So again, welcome to all of you. We're so glad that you're here with us tonight. I'm here at the Washington County Heritage Center to listen to Patrick talk about murders. Obviously, everyone likes a good murder based on how many people are here. So a couple quick things. If you do need a restroom, there are some just right out through that exit there. If you don't want to walk in front of everyone, just go out that rear exit as well. And a few other things, if you have any need for like a watering fountain, that is down the hallway and then turn when you get to the end. So if you'd like to grab some water, please feel free to do so. We have another event that is coming up, you know, always looking towards the next thing, and that is going to be about Minnesota's golden age of wrestling with George Shire. So if you like wrestling, maybe as he said on the phone, and not how it is today, but the old school kind, that is what we are going to have next Tuesday night at 7 p.m., same place, same time. So feel free to come back for that. And let me read a little bit quickly about Patrick to introduce him, and then we'll get to all the good murders. So Patrick L. Shannon is a graduate of De La Salle, am I saying that right? Okay, I'm not from here. High school and the University of St. Thomas. He worked for the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and then spent most of his career with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension as a special agent in narcotics and death investigations. He now writes and is a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. He lives in Minneapolis with his wife and has 2 grown children. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things off to him. Please welcome Patrick L. Shannon.
I'm not a public speaker, but I'm so impressed. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I want to thank the executive director, Brent Peterson, the site manager, Emily, for allowing me to speak tonight. I got some good-looking relatives of mine here, and I'm glad they're not the only ones, so thank you so much. My background is South Minneapolis. I worked at the State Crime Bureau, commonly known as the BCA, the Cedar Truck at Crime Scene, the BCA. That's a forensic unit out there. And when I was there in the 70s, they didn't have that. And what I'm going to talk about, well, the BCA is started in 1927, and it's set up help. Yes.
Could you hold the microphone closer to your mouth?
Yes. Oh, thank you.
Right there.
Okay, the BCA was set up in 1927 to help smaller communities. It still functions that way today. In investigations, if Tower, Minnesota has homicide, the BCA is called, and because Tower doesn't have a homicide squad, they send up investigators and the forensic lab unit to go to the crime scene, make the collections, bring it back to the lab, make them analysis, and investigators help the sheriff or chief of police, whoever up there. The investigation done. When I retired from investigating homicides and all that, I started being interested in what it was like a long time ago, how they invested homicide. I investigated maybe over some in the 40s of how many homicides I investigated. And I was at the crime, maybe 25 crime scenes where the body is there. Unfortunately, I'm kind of a jokester, and I use jokes that cut my nervousness, but there's nothing funny about a person who loses their life. And homicides are so stupid. There's no sense to it. And I always used to say a little prayer for those people that I would do well in the investigation and apprehend the person who did this. So when I retired, I started hanging around the Historical Society, and I looked in old newspapers, and I found that they didn't have such good luck when they had a homicide, they handled it themselves. The sheriff might have one deputy, the chief of police, he might be by himself, but they have a homicide, they got to handle it. And that's what I looked into. I did several, wrote several chapters, but I picked 10. And I thought from various parts of the state, and I thought they were a little different circumstances for each one of them. So I picked out 2 tonight. I don't know if, does anyone here purchase this book? You don't have anyone read?
We have them available back here if you want.
Okay, yeah. Now, I've heard complaints about the book. And I want to be upfront about what's the matter with this book. I apologize for people who said they bought this book, just couldn't put it down. I apologize for their money back. Thank you. So I think that's it. And remember also that there was no fingerprinting, blood matching, DNA, crime scene analysis, mugshots, cameras, or any of the tools that we have today. They didn't have them. So all the stories are true. So we'll start with the first one. Let's see if this is a story about a William Williams. He's a 20-year-old man. He was a steam fitter.
Keep going.
Okay.
There you go.
He was a steam fitter who met a 14-year-old boy, Johnny Kelly, in a St. Paul hospital in June of 1903 during a flu epidemic. They became friends. Williams really liked this little boy. Williams was from Cromwell, England, and spent 2 years in St. Cloud Reformatory for killing a man in a bar fight. This about 6 years earlier. Once they got out of the hospital, 25-year-old Williams became very possessive of 14-year-old Johnny. He wanted him to travel with him. Parents wouldn't allow him. Williams, he went up to Manitoba, Canada as a steam fitter, came back about a year later. He was going to St. Louis, again, went by Johnny's house, and his parents wouldn't let Johnny go with him. Williams was having a hard time, really missed Johnny, and wrote him letters, threatening letters, better get down here, you better see me, don't forget me, we love each other, and that sort of thing. So I was definitely getting an idea in this research on a paper that this Williams was obviously a pedophile, but they weren't called that then. They were just someone ignored and watched. Williams leaves St. Louis and arrives at the Keller home on April 12th in 1905 at 6 in the evening. Keller's lived at Reed's Court. At that time, they called the buildings, whoever owned it, they called it the Reed family owned it. But now it's 262 Selby, and the building is gone. There it is. It's a duplex, one up, one down. Mrs. Keller, whose husband was out of town when Williams arrives from St. Louis at 6 in the evening. Mrs. Keller says, "Get out, don't come back." And William goes out and starts drinking and gets very drunk. He comes back at midnight and bursts in the house and climbs in the bed with Johnny. Mrs. Keller screams at him. He says, "Out, out, out, you son of a bitch, out." I didn't know women talked like that. I know they do now. That's my personal. Shortly after that, Williams knocks on the door of the clients who live downstairs, and he says, "You better get up there." The Keller family, they both been shot. So Williams then takes off for the police department, which was at the time located on the east side of where the library is downtown St. Paul. He goes to the police station there and tells them everything he's done. They take off, they keep him in jail, and they take off for the crime scene. Mrs. Klein goes upstairs, and Mrs. Keller told her that Williams shot her and Johnny. Johnny was dead. Police arrived to take Mrs. Keller to the hospital, where she died 6 days later. So we jump ahead to the trial. Of course, the trial was 1 month and 4 days after the murder. Nowadays, it takes a year and a half. I've got to sit in jail. No, they didn't do it then. Funny, I'll take that. This is Mrs. Keller. who died. I think she's in her early 50s at the time. This is William Williams. How old was he? He was 28, I believe, when he was arrested. And during the trial, so they asked him, because of his poor reputation he had, Williams' attorney asked him, what's the purpose of your association with Johnny Keller? Williams said, well, he helped me out of the hospital, and I wanted to make things square with him. I wanted to do the best I could. Did you at any time have any immoral relations with him? No, sir. Did you at any time treat him in a natural way? No, sir. And did you ever have at any time a natural or improper social association with him physically? No, sir. The defense told the judge, look, the police didn't allow him to have an attorney there. While I questioned him, Judge Lewis said, well, he came to the police and started talking. They didn't come to him. And what it is now, if you are talking and you're free to go any place, then you don't have to, they don't require you to be quiet, or they don't require you to inform you that you have to have an attorney with you. But when you're in a police station, you're pretty locked up, and you have to tell them the right to be silent, and you can't. So that didn't fly. They went through a quick jury. The jury quickly found him guilty. Williams was sentenced to be hanged. Governor Johnson set the date for February 13th, 1906. Quick sidebar from this: the first person condemned to death in Minnesota was a Dakota Indian named Uhasey in 1852. He was arrested by soldiers at Fort Snelling and convicted for killing a German woman while her and her family traveling in the Minnesota River. The governor issued a warrant for the execution, and on December 29th, 1854, Ramsey County Sheriff Abraham Shirley constructed the gallows on 5th and Cedar. Abraham Shirley, who later on went to be an investor in North Minneapolis and that section of the state, he became very wealthy, and the city of Shirley was named after him. Once a sheriff from Ramsey County. The governor made him move the gallows, which was on 5th and Cedar, because there were a big crowd around there. They're all drinking and hooping and hollering, kind of like a Viking crowd or something. Just, that wasn't very appropriate. So he moved it down the street, put it on the wagon, and of course the crowd followed the wagon. And later that evening, they did hang the poor man. On March 23rd, 1860, Anne Belinsky was executed for killing her husband by arsenic. Again, the gallows were outside the sheriff's courthouse in downtown St. Paul, where the sheriff escorted her to gallows. She went out in a black robe and had a veil over her head. She prayed for 5 minutes, and then she was ready to meet her God. A black hood was placed over her head and a noose around her neck. She's the only woman hanged in the state of Minnesota. She's buried in an unmarked grave at the St. Paul Calvary Cemetery. There's something like 65 people who were hanged in the state of Minnesota. She's the only woman. 38 of them were Indians in Mankato. Because of this circus that was going on, hangings all over the country were becoming popular for unruly crowds. By 1890, most states outlawed execution publicly. They had to go indoors. So back to our man, William Williams. Here is the bed that he found. Here's the house that the Kellers lived in. And that's him. That's the sheriff, Anton Meeson, at the time. This is a crime scene where he was, Johnny Keller was shot twice in the head. Mrs. Keller was shot once in the chest. He was sentenced to death, and his attorney came to him on the 18th of February 12th, 1906, saying, the date for your hanging is tomorrow. I got bad news from anybody I could make an appeal to turned me down. So sorry. They shook hands, and about midnight, the jailer came in and gave Williams a brand new suit and a white shirt with a stiff collar. Williams said that was the first time or in a long time, that he ever wore a shirt with a stiff collar like that. He said it was one of the few times that he was dressed up in a nice black suit. He was led downstairs. Beforehand, he left the cell. He shook hands with the cook and the deputies who he was playing cards with, and the deputies who watched over him. He was led downstairs. This is from the paper, and it's about 2 steps, and down to the basement, where again it wasn't public; it's just private. The sheriff allowed a few of his personal friends, a couple from law enforcement, and some press in there, but that was it. This is the courthouse, beautiful courthouse that is torn down, but this is where the trial was. This is what the courtroom looked like. It was beautiful the way compared to what they have now. This is what they looked like, and there wasn't much of a gallery, just balconies. But this is where he was tried. This is a picture of the basement, and that's the gallows up there. I have one. There's a now the gallows here. You can see there's 13 steps going up. I don't know why. I think that's had something to do with the number 13. Not very good luck. But anyway, you'll see the noose is pretty low there. And a rope up in the corner there is kind of saying, so it's a loose thing. On the arrival downstairs, William takes the short 13 steps up. He once again stated he was innocent, for he loved Johnny and would never harm him. The deputy put the rope around his neck, and the sheriff pulled the lever, sending Williams through the floor. Sheriff Meissen later gave a statement to the St. Paul Daily News, stating the execution went as planned. There were no mistakes. There was not a slip anywhere in the procedure. I pulled the trap myself, and they helped pull the rope. The official witnesses preserved good order, and many of them were deeply impressed. Well, didn't take much impression. Not quite sure. The other news came out that Williams' feet hit the floor. The sheriff had a new rope, and they didn't test it. They're supposed to have a new rope. They put a couple 100-pound pegs of potatoes on it, let it drop, and let it stretch. He didn't do that. Williams' neck stretched over 4 inches, and the rope over 8 inches. Three deputies stood up on the gallows there and pulled on the rope while his feet was still on the floor. It was they pulled on him for 14 minutes. He finally died, and what the autopsy said, he was not. He didn't die of a hanging person. He snapped her neck, the spinal cord. They break their neck, the spinal cord is broken, and they died almost instantly. He died of strangulation. The spinal cord was attacked. William Williams was the last person hanged in the state of Minnesota. He's buried in an unmarked grave in Calvary Cemetery in St. Paul. I had one person, if I could. I had one of my first homicides is helping out in Scott County. A man, he killed his children and then hung himself. And I was downstairs with him alone, but I don't know how, it's just a crime scene analysis. You want to stay out of the way. But his neck was, and I hate to be too gross, but his neck was about 10 inches. So he was just hanging there overnight. It's just a terrible, terrible thing. Terrible way to go. And, so I can understand how this William Wynn died because of his torturous strangulation. There was the outlaw. So, questions or comments? That was. I said. Oh, Mrs. Blesky. Did I miss that? Okay. Mrs. Blesky, the only woman to be. She put arsenic in her husband's food. She was having an affair with a 26-year-old man who was living with him. And it's kind of a mix-up story. But anyway, she was giving him arsenic. Now, arsenic we see on television, something kills you instantly. It doesn't. I was called out on a and I used to do this often with a sheriff way out in the western part of the state or north would call me and say, run to the hospital and talk to this guy. We get informed that his wife had been finding a ton of arsenic at it. And we go to the hospital, and the hospital says, yes, but no one's told him. I talk, so I didn't talk. He says, I was like, oh, his fingers were totally white. His fingernails was totally white. He was saying, I said, I suspect your wife was giving arsenic in your food, because she was the food preparer there. He was kind of stunned, but not shocked. He said things weren't going that well. But I guess let's say baseball. Anyway, I hope he recovered, but that's never the same. Because once you do that, the poison gets in your brain and your body. It's never. But I presume that he separated. So, any questions? All right. Okay, the next one. Next one is kind of my favorite. That sounds like my favorite house. Yeah. Going wrong. I have to go to the top. I don't know how to go.
Backwards.
Yeah, so I got to go real quick. Pretend you don't see. Oh, there. The person at this investigation, her name's Annette Seidendecker. She lives up in Traverse County, and they refer to her as Tony. This is the county seat, Wheaton, Minnesota, where Annette lived in a farm outside. In 1905, in Traverse County, Minnesota, the population was 7,500 people. Wheaton was the county seat. And I always wonder why the streets are so wide there, and they're still wide. You go through those towns, it's still, I think, good planning. Yeah. Wheaton is located next to South and North Dakota. It's on the line there, touches those states. Annette Seidendecker, I call her Tony, was pulled out of the 6th grade because her mother was bedridden and later died, and she had to take care of her younger brother and 2 younger sisters. She did the cooking, was the mother of the household by her father farm. There was a hired hand on the neighboring farm. His name was Herman Shep. He occasionally would run into Tony, and they would talk. And at one time, they were alone in the neighbor's house, and he said that he really cared for her. And they kept on a friendship that later turned into where he was talking that he was in love with her and wanted to marry her. She was persistent. He was persistent, and finally she agreed to marry him. But they agreed. They both said keep it a secret because she was so young, and he was so much older than her. He was like 20 years old at the time. And he then took another job at a different in a different part of the county and stopped corresponding with her. Her little sisters came from school and told Tony that Herman was running around with Addie Deal. Her cousin said that she was at a dance where Addie and Herman were kissing and drinking from the same cup. They're obviously in love with each other. Her cousin asked Herman, why didn't you see Tony anymore? And he referred to her as a Dutch bitch. So that was reported back to Tony. Now Tony, this caused Tony to be physically ill. Her appetite, her eyes were watering bad. So on May 25th of that year, her dad hooked up the buggy and horse and buggy and said, go into town and see the doctor. So she goes into town, but she goes to the hotel in Wheaton to see her cousin, find out where Herman's working. Herman's working at the Terry Farm, which is about miles south of Wheaton. She then goes to the hardware store and asks the owner, Auto Doc, to borrow a gun. She says she was attacked by a wolf and they were killing the stock. So she needed a gun. Man gives her a gun, 32 caliber, and puts 5 bullets. He asks, "You want them?" He asks, "You want a box of cartridges?" She says, "No." She goes to the Terry farm where Mrs. Steele's working there and says, "Herman's out in the field being short." She waits and Herman comes in with a team of horses in a wagon. He puts the horses away and joins Tony on her wagon. And they go for a ride on the farm. Mrs. Steele. This is the farm. That's Mrs. Steele, and that's the farmhouse that she lived in. Where lost my place. She then okay. Herman puts the horses away and he joins Tony, and they sit on the buggy together, and they start going round on the grounds of the farm. Pretty soon, Mrs. Steele hears like what she thinks is gunshot and looks out the window and sees the wheel of the buggy caught in a gatepost. She approached the buggy and she didn't see anybody in it. She approached the buggy and saw Herman, who was shot, laying between the wheel and the buggy. His shirt was on fire. Mrs. Steele said she ran, got a bucket of water, put it on Herman, put the fire out. She saw Tony laying down on the seat with blood oozing from her side. Her clothes were smoldering. So she put out the fire and she presumes that she's dead. She went to the neighboring farm. She took a horse from Tony's buggy, put it on her own, went to the neighboring farm, said, go to Dermot. Somebody had a phone there. Call the sheriff and have a doctor. I got 2 dead people at the Terry farm. When she got back, she found that Tony was moving around, and her and a hired hand from the other farm moved her into the house. The sheriff and doctor got there, and they pronounced Herman dead. The doctor removed 2 bullets from Tony's back. She shot herself in the side, and the bullets circled around, and they were lodged in her back, not penetrating any ribs. The trial was set for June 26th, 1 month and 1 day after the murder. Going back to that farm, I said that Tony was in, and she talked to the sheriff that said she shot her, but she was in great pain. She just wanted to die. She had said, "Please let me die." Her date for the trial for first-degree murder, that was set for June 26, 1905. If found guilty, she would be hanged. If she was, photo. I want to show the photo of her, Tony. That's her, the time of arrest. These are the guys. I want to point out too that here's the jury, 12 men. Here's the sheriff, and here's Chef, and here's Murphy, her attorney. And I suspect when the attorney was before the trial, they picked the jury. Of course, they go all through the prosecution and the defense. Each pick their jurors, and I met if Murphy was anything at all. He asked every one of these men, "Who's got the daughter?" And you're in. So he got the daughter, you're in. So I suspect that's what he did. And during the prosecution, let's see, can I go down? This is what she looks like at the time of trial. Mrs. Hopkins, who was the sheriff's wife, and another lady who were taking care of her. And she was had some very severe mental problems, but was coming to it. They dialed her up for the first degree trial murder. She was 13 years old. Oh. Did you stand up? This girl This girl here is 13. That's pretty tall. So thank you, Holly. So you get an idea how young for a first degree murder. Wow, this kid. So the prosecution said, look, she admitted everything. She had the gun. She went and got the gun. This is obviously premeditated. She wasn't crazy because she wrote a letter to Herman once she found out where she thought he was. She said, "Dear Herman, now this is a kid who had a 5th grade education. It is with great reluctance that I enter upon the subject that has given me great pain, and upon which silence has become impossible." Yeah. I copied myself. The Historical Society still has these letters of once the trial was over, they used to send everything to the Historical Society. It is great reluctance that I enter upon a subject that has given me great pain, and upon which silence has become impossible if I could preserve my self-respect. You cannot but be aware that I have just reason for saying that you have much displeased me. You have apparently forgotten what is due me, circumstances as we are, thus at far at least. You cannot suppose that I tamely see you disregard my feelings by conduct towards other girls, from which I should naturally have the right to expect and esteem. I don't know if I explained earlier that, I hope I did, I explain that they were planning to get married. Yeah, I did see that. She was when he abandoned her. I'm not so vulgar a person to be jealous. You will not live to see my heart crushed. When there is a cause to interfere, change feelings, or unfaithfulness to promise of consistency, jealousy is not a remedy. What the remedy is, I will need say, we both of us have had it in our hands. I am sure you will agree with me that we must come to some kind of understanding. All you are good for is breaking a girl's heart. You're the first man I ever loved, and I always said you would be the last. I always considered the lucky girl who did you, but now I pity her. How can you look at an innocent girl in the face and commit such a crime? Why, you ought to be hung. If you want this deal so bad, you can have her, for she ain't any better than you. But I'm telling you one thing. If I don't come to the point of speaking to you pretty soon, I shall write your sister, and I know 5 different girls that you've been going with. I shall let them know of this terrible disgrace. I shall get revenge. I am 3 years older than Miss Steele. Now Herman was dating this Miss Steele. That made her 10 years old. I am 3 years older than Miss Steele. I think I really realize what I'm doing. Having you the last bit of respect for yourself. I also loved you with extreme passion of a woman's heart. I always thought you were a very honest man. Always took pity on you. But I think different now. Believe me. I write more in anger than in sorrow. You have made me very unhappy, and you'll never regret it either. It will take much to reassure me of your unaltered regard. Yours truly, Antoinette. So that was the prosecution. Said, does that sound like an end theme? Yeah, so well written. 5 years education. Murphy, her turn. As I said, I think he picked up the answer. He put Tony on a stand, and Tony said she was first met Herman when she was 11, and she's now 13. And he proposed to her. She said she had, when Herman abandoned her, she thought she may be pregnant. This caused her much mental harm because of his treatment. She was short, her feet was dangling as she talked. And they went on, and she explained how the mental anguish that she went through because of his abandonment. So Mr. Murphy talked about that to the jury of 12 men, and he summarized his argument to the jury, saying, a wrong child led by honey words and promises to her ruin, where childish confidence and love changed to the blackness of a despair, which disowned reason. The judge then explained to the jury the difference between premeditated murder, first degree, and insanity of a person committing an act that normally wouldn't if they were seen. So that was kind of the two things that the jury had to figure out. These 12 men, they were sent downstairs, and they had a sandwich and coffee. About 6 o'clock. Around 6:30, they called the judge and said, "We made a decision." He says, "You can't make a decision. Listen, you have to go over. You have to go over every bit of it." She said, "Yeah, we handle the order on it." So a lot of people were going home by then. So the deputies, go get these people. Come on back. People worked at the court, and so it took to about 8 o'clock. Finally, they got everybody in the room, and they asked the foreman and the jury, "What do you think?" Expecting either guilty first degree for this 13-year-old girl or insanity. And the verdict was not guilty. Not guilty. So Herman Chef must have committed suicide. So I don't know how they did that, but I tell you something, those dads, they didn't like the way that girl was treated, and they showed it. Wow. And the whole court was just packed. Everybody in town, everybody could get there, cheered. They said, newspapers said it was just a great victory for the county, and that's the way it is now. Let's see. That was Tony. Well, I got a full address. Tony, let's see. I got. Yeah. I guess I saw that. There she is. Where do I have it? I want to tell you what happened to Tony. Tony, her father put her in a convent in Minneapolis to finish. So she wouldn't. She got her RN license, and then in 1920, when she would be about 20 years old, she married a guy by the name Newcomb was his name, and he was a laborer. They went to North Dakota, and where he worked farm to farm, and he worked strip mining. He worked the mines, jumping. They had 6 children, 4 girls and 2 boys. I got the address of the last surviving child, a woman by the name of Helen. She worked in Washington, D.C. as administrative assistant. She's 92 years old. And so I wrote her and said, "Could you help me out on this investigation I'm doing?" I'm writing an article on Bob when she was having that, when she's charged with first-degree murder when she was 13 years old. She wrote back, says, "What trial?" Why do I do that? And so I felt so bad. So I sent her all the newspaper articles about the trial. And she wrote back, says, "Yes, my mom was so pretty." And that was a good picture of her. She said her high cheekbones, she had all her life. She said that the family suffered from being poor. They didn't ever have any much money. And Tony died at the age of 62 of heart disease. Her husband died at the age of 38, and he died of pneumonia. The Halton family, who her husband was from, got upset with Tony because she thought he had pneumonia, and she didn't call a doctor. That she sent her boy to the drugstore to get some medication for him, and he didn't survive. So she was in trouble with her in-laws, and Harley made it a difficult time during her life because of her poverty. Her daughter said she was an excellent piano player. She was an excellent organ player. She loved to sing. She traveled one time over 20 miles on a horse and buggy to see a concert. These things that she normally couldn't afford. So she wrote prose and poetry. A very bright girl, but never had the peace and dignity that I think she deserved. So I think that's it on my 2 chapters. There's 8 more chapters. Well, I won't go through them. I want to thank you for helping out out here. You're very cute. So, questions? Al, H-A-L. Yes, sir.
And at the end of one of your stories, you say if you look across the street, you can see who did the crime or something.
Oh, yeah.
Is that true? If we go downtown St. Paul, we'll be able to.
Yes. Oh, good question. There was a murder down on West 7th Street. A man was set on fire and in his bed. And he had 3 daughters, and he ran out to the street and said, "Help my dad, help my dad." So the paper boy and a neighbor came and put a blanket over and doused the fire. He ran a butcher market in town. And at the time, it just seemed in my research, every block had at least one butcher market because it was fresh meat that day. Well, to make a long story short, the door was always open. They didn't lock the doors in those days. This is 1909, and the cops arrived there, and they found in the basement a big axe with blood on it. They also found the kerosene. They used to wipe things down with kerosene to connect the dust. And they found that was sprayed over. None of the girls were woken. The mom was seen with burns on the side. She got in the bathtub, and make a long story short, of all these 3 girls and the mom, no one knew nothing. And it's called family silence. And what happened, as we keep referring to, those businesses downtown put names on top of the buildings, and Louise was the one that he liked the best, and she had some mental conditions, and she was in and out of the hospital. And they would have a mental ward at the general hospital. So they presumed she did it, and maybe the mother, somebody in the house had to do it. So they couldn't tell. They tried the mother, and she was found innocent because lack of evidence. And they were going to try Louise, but they figured it'd be the same evidence. Why waste it? And sometimes prosecutors want to wait. Let's not do it now, because what if someone comes up 10 years from now and says he did it or she did it? So they said, let's wait. Well, it was never solved. And across the street from where the crime happened, the house has been moved now, but across the street from where the crime happened is the name of the building, and up is the building, and the name of it is Louise. So I put that in the book. And some people went on Google and went up and found out. I think it was her. She died in a mental institution about 15 years later. The other 2 women, other 2 daughters, they didn't marry. There was already one married at the time of the dad's death. The mom moved to New Orleans. The 2 daughters, they lived in the house, and when West 7th was widened, they moved someplace else because they tore the house down. I spoke to a niece of those 2 women, and who lives in Florida, and she said they never mentioned it. They never mentioned about the murder of their dad. So I have the pictures and everything in the book, and I could cover that at another time. I don't want to. I'm here. Any other questions? Yes.
What are some cases that you were a part of yourself that still keep you up at night, if any?
Well, it happened. It was one that is still unsolved. I worked a lot of them. Once you solve a case, you kind of forget. The guy goes away to prison for a long time. After about 20 years in prison, they start screaming, "We got a bad deal. Sorry, please." But the one I have is a lady, woman, 28 years old, working at, I forget the name of the store, 7-Elevens. Well, she was stabbed to death at 3 in the morning, and they were called out there, volunteer, and there's no fingerprints, no nothing. They didn't have cameras now, so if you're going to be a crook today, remember the cameras are all over the place. It really helps. So we were stuck, and I think I knew who the guy was. He was a former mental patient out of St. Peter, and he about 6 months later, this guy, I won't give his name because I can't. He stabbed a woman at a garage rental place. Didn't take any money. Stabbed her 7 times. Medics got there, put her in a rubber container, how they blow it up, and put it over your body so it doesn't let any blood get out. And it saved her life. And she was so scared. This guy, what he did, he pulled out, he had a target slip there, target charge slip, so it fell on the floor. And it was so short, that's how they picked him up. I knew that was my guy. He lived a block away. I talked to him, and he said, "No, won't talk to me anymore." The last day when I worked there, I took a job as director of security at the racing division. When I went to Stillwater prison, he said, "Do me a favor, just tell me one more thing." He went to it. He just blew up, and he walked off. And then once he got out, he moved to Colorado. So I let the people out there know, and I don't know whatever happened to him, but he's just a cold-blooded killer. I also worked on Margie Caldwell. Did you ever hear her?
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well.
Talk about the killer.
You're good on time, don't worry.
Okay, well, she was Marjorie, short gal, and she was married to a guy by the name of Leroy. She had 6 children. She is an adopted daughter of Elizabeth Connor. Elizabeth never married. She adopted 2 children from Wisconsin, and Marjorie was one of them. And Marjorie used to keep her own money from, pardon me?
No, I'm just talking to myself.
Oh, sorry. Marjorie was one, she's a spinster. Her and Leroy had, I believe, 5 or 6 children, and the children had been dressed to the nines. He worked, he had an average job, and he was at one time when I interviewed, he was working up, ran a limousine at the airport. So he just seemed like an average man, and he was. But that wasn't good. So she divorced him, and she hooked up with a guy named Roger Call. Roger was a drunk, and she was, if you knew her, and I got to know her, but she's very bossy. She was the one. This is how it's gonna be, and boom, boom, boom. And so she was running out of money, and she went to her attorneys on the trust said, "Don't give Marjorie any more money. She's spending it. It's supposed to be the law. The trust said that this money will be dispersed after my last child dies." This is from Cogman, and the last child was living up in the Cogman mansion in Duluth, and she was living by herself and had maid service. And as we know, the maid and Elizabeth was killed. They tried to charge her. She was in town. I worked a little bit of that, trying to track the phones down for Duluth. And our guys were working on it too. Well, she was found innocent, and he was found guilty. And Marjorie, all her love for this guy, saw him only once after the trial. She served papers on him when he was in Stillwater. You know, this is a real high. She and then I had her on a case out in Deep Haven. She bought a house. A young couple, I don't know, they were young, they were getting divorced. He worked at Target, and she taught school. And they had a nice house out there, older house, but they had a lot of land on it. So she told the realtor in Bachman's and said, I'm going to put a horse farm out here. I'm going to just raise horses. and she made a bunch of improvements on the house. And Bachman's knew who she was. They spent about $5,000-$10,000 worth of flowers all over the place, and other companies did. Put a glass ceiling because they knew that this woman came from money and knew who she was. The night before signing, the house burned down, and she was off the hook. Bachman's, those carpenters, they had nothing. So, and the couple who were divorcing, they were just sick because they weren't getting all the money back. She just walked away straight. I remember we were at the crime scene, it was arson. She drove in. She says, "What's going on? How's it going to buy this house? Who's in charge?" So they all pointed to me and said, "You, what? Explain to me right now." I said, "Okay, why don't we talk tonight? Well, maybe could you come to the police station?" She said, "Oh, sure, no problem. Yeah, shake hands." So I called her up. I said, she had told me, "Maybe you just better come over to my house." I said, "Fine." So I could put down the tape recorder, have some questions that I've written out. So I call her up, say, "I'm on my way." She said, "No, you're not. My dog's sick. He's throwing up all over the place. Come back tomorrow." I go back tomorrow. She says, "Pat, I tell you something. I just happened to be talking to my attorney, Ron Measurement. And I just happened to mention he might be stopping by this one." And he said, "No, don't." Give him a call. So I called Measurement. "What's the deal?" She said I could talk to her. I said, "No, you can't. Don't you know better than that." So there I am. So about a year later, Margie's married. She married a man by the name of Wally Hagan. And Wally was a widower. He lived out in Minnetonka, had a home out there, and they had some money. So Helen Hagan died mysteriously at a restaurant. She had some dementia, and they had on her when she died. They had to call Marjorie, her sister. They weren't related at all. Call her sister for details how to handle that. So they called Marjorie. Marjorie, who was feeding her beforehand that night, and they said, "Your sister died. Get her cremated." Okay, no, sir. Mrs. Hagan had 2 kids, grown kids, and grandchildren. They didn't know about it. Everybody was cremated. So she marries Wally, her husband. Wally is this. She talks Wally into it. He's kind of a guy very dependent upon others to make decisions. And his wife is gone, who was kind of made a decision in her family. So Marjorie steps in and says, "Wally, your children are trying to take your money, and don't listen to them." So Wally doesn't talk to his adult children anymore. They own a house in Deep Haven, and it's an old house. It's a small house that was once owned by Henry Hill, one of his engineers, built the railroad, and very antique. So the new people were going to buy it, and they were going to make an antique place out of it because there's plenty of room for parking. Well, Marjorie sets the deal, you can buy it, and the thing is, I want you to take out insurance on it right now, a couple of days before. I'm worried that this thing, I'll be out this night. It's only a day and a half, so they take out, we'll take out the insurance policy on it. The night before, it burns down. So there I am again, and I'll tell her. This time she made a mistake. I did a search warrant on her back up at the house. They called it the Cranberry House. She got the money. She got the money for her house, and the other people got the burnt property. All worked out. So there's so many side stories about her, but she made a mistake. There were several windows in the wall. Interviewed every fireman and said they're all locked, every one of them. So whoever burnt this place down had to have a key. Do a search warrant on her house where she's living now, and I found a key. Of course, I had to be me finding it. So we go back there and it works. I say, well, this is it. So we get a arrest warrant, and she we arrested her right there at the scene and took her down. This was on the Sunday. She got out Sunday night. Nobody gets out. She did. She called Mesh Fisher, who calls the judge, and she was out that night. So she was found guilty, and she went to Shakopee prison for women. Spent 3 years there. After that, she went down to Tucson, where Wally and her lived. And what she tried to do is burn a deputy that lived a couple blocks away from her. He was found her giving her a hard time. His house was someone put cotton and lighter fluid on his window and lit it and wet. So they found, they put that out. She did it again, and they caught her. They're waiting for her. Caught her. And so she found guilty again. And her husband Wally, who loved talking to the waitresses or servers at the local coffee shop, loved to tease them. So he was in that day, and she was going to court to be sentenced, and she got another 3 years down in Arizona. And they wheel in Wally in a stretcher. Wally says, "Let me get my husband straight away." And then he was just, as they looked, they found out afterwards at the coffee shop, teasing the girls. And he was now in the stretcher. So they said, "Okay, we'll give you a day before they go away to prison." So they let him and her go home. She was supposed to report the next day. A jogger comes jogging by that afternoon, and he smells gas in the place. He goes out of the house, and "You got gas?" No, that was a mistake. We fixed it. It's fine now. Thank you for stopping. We're airing out the place. Get lost. And, Wally later committed suicide. He writes a note. This guy was just the day before I was teasing with the girl. They loved him. Everybody, he's this nice guy. And somehow she talked him into committing suicide. She went from the prison and spent 3 years there. When she got out of prison, none of her children were there. I believe she had 5 or 6 children, none were there. She's now in a senior citizen home in Tucson. That's some of my case. I hope my alarm. Oh man, I'm sorry.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? The book, they do have some books for sale there. I could go on with others. There's 8 other chapters of murders. Thank you. Very nice.